record, my brother.
Hey Nick, man, how you doing?
Good, good. So, I mean, I'm back now, and you're how you should be, which is on my screen in a
Yeah.
little square instead of
Yeah,
actually
so I don't
fully
see
in.
that you're not actually paying attention while I'm talking. Like the key moment from that live recording studio is when I made a powerful plea for respect in debate, and you were making dinner reservations or something on your phone. You weren't even
That's
listening.
not true. And I respect you. You were well, all right. But one of the things we talked about was I was in this session, uh, qualitative meta-analysis where and what I thought was interesting is so we got in this little debate about using LLMs for qualitative work. And then I've talked about to a bunch of people since, and that seems to be a really, really important area where
Yeah.
there's no real guidance out there yet, is
Not
there?
yet, right? Not yet. I mean, but clearly this is a topic that people are working on. I'm guessing. I'm just guessing. Right.
Yeah. And for quantitative analysis too, it's really interesting because, as everyone knows, ChatGPT. Now, I don't know about five. I haven't played with it, but four has problems with math, right? And a lot of these LLMs have a lot of problem with math. And you hear these stories about people in industry. They use them for sentiment analysis. They'll use them for certain types of analysis. And it's fine. It works more or less well. But then when you try and use it for some sort of math or statistical work, it hallucinates and gives you bad output. And the problem is people who are not well equipped to think they think that they're getting good results in, say, regressions or whatever it is they're doing, and they're not. Now, what's happening is they're adding math functionality. So there are certain
They have math reasoning models, and with
yeah.
five is a bit the problem that you don't pick them; it picks it itself,
Yeah.
right?
So I think we're going to figure out the mathematics part,
Yeah,
and it's
I'd
going to
say
happen
so.
really soon. It's happening right now. We'll get to the point where we know what these LLMs can do, and we'll know what's valid and what's not. So we'll be using them instead of R or Stata or whatever it is,
I'd say so, or
SPSS.
Python
Yeah.
even. I mean, like at the moment, it
Yeah.
serves as a nice interface. Like I was talking to ChatGPT. I was talking to ChatGPT. I was using ChatGPT the other day in the context of a simulation paper. And
Hmm.
like without me asking, it was suggesting formalized code and then asked me
Hmm.
whether it wants me to put it into Python directly. I
Yeah.
was like, no, no, no. But actually, that's not a bad idea.
But there's the thing. We know it's not quite there.
Yeah.
And and you talk about coding. It's really funny because students
Oh, yeah.
will use ChatGPT or whatever to generate their Python code, and then they'll submit it for a test. And this is what we see happening is that it's putting in code that apparently you can tell that it's not quite, there's a particular way that these things code that is different than maybe how humans do it. But what's really interesting is they'll introduce ideas that were not in the course. So students who do a bad job in the rest of the course will submit
Yeah.
their code, and then it's much more sophisticated than anything they covered in the course.
Well,
And it's
it could
like,
be more sophisticated. I mean, like I see the same problem when I work with it in the context, let's say in writing or idea development in more general, in that it just misses the context. Now, it could be more sophisticated or something, but for example, in idea development, even when I talk about a particular stream of literature, there's a particular vocabulary attached to it.
mhm,
And then it just uses different words. I was like, no,
yeah,
you can't say it this way. We just talked about that, we have these and these terms. Don't do it this way, right? So, and again, it looks very good. It really takes a close look to realize that's not quite what you're looking for, right? So I think
yeah,
that's the danger because if you use it as some sort of automation, right? So give it a tag, give it a prompt, and it does something, and then you basically copy and paste. And whether it be for coding, for writing, for anything, that's really dangerous because I think it gets you to a certain level. But actually, that's not the level that I want it to be. I want it to be
yeah.
a couple of levels higher, whether it be in writing, in analysis, and even in programming and coding. It's sort of it gets you to this. It sounds horrible. This medium level. You know what I mean?
Mhm,
Like
yeah,
it gets you to a B journal.
yeah.
It doesn't get you to an A journal.
It's
So
not mastery. It's
no, it's
it's
not
the lowest
mastery,
common
right?
denominator. All right, so
Exactly.
this is so we're going to take these two off the table because we're going to discuss qualitative coding. But I think quantitative for again, there's a lot to this, but quantitative coding, logical reasoning, formalisms, it's going to do all that for us and it will do it well. but it's not there yet.
It's not quite there yet, but it also will help, and I think it's a good thing because what it does, it takes the human effort, not in the mathematics, not in the statistics, just in the programming away, right? It's like a better interface, like Smart PLS when it came about, and you didn't have to type in the syntax in
Mhm.
with formal code anymore. You could drag and drop. It kind of is the same to me now, right? In that sense. It's not quite there yet, except for the fact that it introduces problems, which the previous versions didn't do.
Yeah, but it's just like when LLMs first came out. I was interviewed by someone, and I basically said LLMs are just search. But it's doing the integration for you. So it's essentially searching the internet, which is essentially what it did. It searched the internet, it generated these languages, and it's giving you some sort of probabilistic outcome based on what it thinks your prompt is, what you want. So I thought it was search, but it's search that doesn't let you see the logic of the search and doesn't let you see its homework. So I think that's the issue with a lot of quantitative. It's, yeah, if you know what you're doing, you can evaluate it. Um, as far as writing, yeah, if it generates something for you, that's a, C student level. It's the lowest common denominator. It's like an average,
Yeah, it's
very boring, very kind of abstract, high level that it generates. Now, I do know a lot of people, particularly people who don't write English as their first language, and they swear by using a lot of these LLMs. They'll write a few paragraphs, they'll put it in the LLM and say, clean it up. And in that case, it's basically like Grammarly or something like that, where it just makes you sound a little bit better. I think it's good for that. So I think as academics, we should do our own writing because you learn when you write, you
and you think
reason when
while
you
you
write.
write.
But I think it's perfectly fine to use these LLMs to clean up your language, I suppose. But then so those are that's quantitative, that's writing, but then there's the other part, which is qualitative researchers. Qualitative researchers may interview, they may, like my qualitative meta-analysis, they might use found qualitative data sets to and try and reinterpret them. Uh, Sometimes it's interview data. One could imagine ethnographic observations. One could imagine just doing online ethnographies where you look at the chat groups and you're
Yeah.
using that as qualitative data.
You
You look
can
at
think
Twitter
about,
feeds.
visual analytics. You can feed it a bunch of pictures and say, now what's happening here, right? Sentiments or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So qualitative work where humans construct some sort of interpretation of, say, unstructured data. Uh, LLMs can do it, and they can do it quite well, and they can make sense out of unstructured data in really interesting ways, and they do. So why? I guess my question to you: why do we need humans to do that? Why don't we just have LLMs do that? And we could prompt it in different ways to get much different outcomes. So that whole idea that it's only going to give you one view, no, it can give you three different views of the exact same data set and show you support, evidence. You could be like, okay, show me where in the data set you're getting this from. Uh, and it
Yeah.
can. I mean, why aren't we just, should all qualitative researchers, Wrecker, be using LLMs?
All right, I'm gonna put out probably a bit of a, if you just take it without the context, I'd say it might be dangerous, but I'd say like I think going forward, all qualitative researchers should work with LLMs.
Whoa, really? That's it. Boom. You're being prescriptive.
As a blunt statement, now of course, now we have to bring in the context and the nuance and all that sort of stuff. But in general, I think my assessment is not based on, I haven't used it a lot for this. I played around with this. So for example, one of the things I did, I took a paper of mine that has qualitative data, it's single authored, like it's just me. It's not a big paper. It's a paper from a couple of years ago, just Jan Recker paper, qualitative data. And the reason I did that is just simply because I knew everything that I did, right? Because it was all me, right? Single author.
Hmm.
And I said like, hey, have a look at this. And then I played around with this and interacted with this, like, what do you think? And what would you do? And do. And it was incredibly useful to that end. So as a dialogue partner, as someone that I'm interacting with by myself or even in a team, I think it has tremendous possibilities and affordances and and advantages that I think it would be stupid to ignore. So I'll give you a couple of obvious ones.
Okay.
Think about qualitative research before you even go to do the interviews in this classical design, semi-structured interview protocol, these sorts of things. Now, let's
Hmm.
say this is theory informed. And you're
Hmm.
building a protocol. You know how most people build protocols. They just write down a bunch of questions. They're more or less
Yeah.
structured, more or less consistent, and more or less coherent, and usually are like, hey, about the person, about the role, about the organization, about anything else. That's usually what we mean with a semi-structured interview. So it's not
Right.
really carefully designed, etc. And
Yeah.
imagine the things an LLM could do as a quality assurance mechanism, given your research problem, given the informants, give it a bit of data, give it a bit of context, and then give it your protocol and ask it to be a critical. And not just like, what do you think? It'll be very positive about it. And then you tell the LLM, like, no, be more critical, be more critical, be more
Mhm.
critical, do it better. Like these sort of series of prompts. And then I think that's really variable. And I haven't even talked to a single person yet. Right.
Yeah.
So the what you mentioned, the multiple viewpoints, I think that's again that's tremendously helpful. Even if I take my coding of data and say like this is my open coding or this is my I don't know my Gioia data structure or this is whatever I'm doing, yeah, challenge me, give me a different
Yeah.
one. What do you see? It's right. So all of that as a dialogue partner is so powerful and so resourceless. Why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah. So what I did this spring, so Notebook LM. This is
Yeah,
the Google
the Google version.
based on Gemini. It's like it's got this. It's a really nice. I think it's an elegant interface. You throw all your documents on the left. You ask it questions, and then you get the answers, but then you can trace it to where in those documents you found. So you create a notebook, and then from that notebook of documents, you can ask it questions. And you can, so I did that. I didn't have that many interviews. I had like 8 interviews or something like that. I threw those on the left side, all of the interviews. And that's what you do. You ask it to structure, and you can even give it the constructs,
Yeah.
the operationalization of the constructs, and then say, okay, find me some evidence of this, relate these constructs to these other constructs, right? So it can help you identify the constructs. But if you conducted the interviews, this is what I took away from playing around with it. And again, there's no paper from this, and it was me playing. But if I didn't conduct the interviews myself, know the context and know everything, I'm not sure I would have known which constructs to give it, how to operationalize it, right? You need to know something.
Yeah.
But since I did know the interviews, I was able to ask questions in certain ways. I could see what I liked. I mean, I'm not using this for research yet. I didn't try to publish it. I didn't try to
Nope.
write a paper. I'm
Neither
just
here.
playing.
But I'm playing
But
around with it. Yep.
but that's where I think we could really go well, because I think what qualitative researchers struggle with quite often is, that they talk about coding and it's hard to code. You have to go through, you do open coding. Then you pick if we're doing like a grounded theory or coding based qualitative work. Uh, then you pick your categories, your upper level codes, your whatever. You start unifying these codes into sets of codes. You make that decision in the process, and then you're kind of stuck with the decisions you made. And then 2 years later, after you've submitted the paper and they want you to it's really hard to change. It's so path dependent, this qualitative process. It's like how I made sense of it in the first few rounds in the first 6 months is kind of what I'm stuck with in the next 3 years as I try to publish the paper. What you can do with these things is that front end part of the open and trying to make sense. I mean, I don't want to read my interviews 30 times. So I'm going to read it once or twice and have my codes and then use in vivo or Atlas or whatever to get at. So I think this helps you play with different in that front fuzzy front end of qualitative research to have more codes or more ways of making sense of the same data set. Does that make
Well, I
sense?
think yeah, I see that. That's to me is a scaling advantage, I guess. Right? I've coded a little bit, I code this, now code everything else consistently with that. So I
Hmm.
think in a very traditional case study research, a positivist stance, if you want to call it that, it would also have some obvious advantages in doing reliability, reliable coding. Hi,
Hmm.
I've coded 20 interviews. This is the code. This is how I code. Code the same way. Or check my coding for
All
consistency.
right, dude, you just said two things. You said positivist, and then you said reliability. Uh, this is something that drives me nuts. This whole, if I'm interpretive, that means that I can just hand wave like a bunch of Europeans and not be disciplined because I'm interpretive. Um, those positivists are the ones who work in some sort of linear format where they operationalize constructs. I disagree actually fundamentally with that. I think assuming you're not, Clifford Geertz and doing like pure description and then trying to make sense of it afterwards. If you're writing a paper, you have an assumption. You're looking for some general relationships among concepts. Uh, you're a researcher. You need discipline. I don't care if you call yourself interpretive. I don't care if you call yourself positivist. I don't care what you call yourself. You need discipline and rigor. You need to define your constructs and use constructs. You need to
No.
show how you've operationalized those constructs. The sloppiness, you can't be sloppy and then call yourself an interpretivist. I think we are all interpretivists in the sense that we're doing interpretation and we're
Yeah, we're all creating
constructing
interpretations and
explanation.
seeing whether of them are plausible and useful.
Yeah. And we're all positivists in the sense that we're trying to elicit regularities. Unless you are indeed trying to do rich description, trying to do like a clever interpretive act, which no qualitative papers
Or a
we
very
publish ever do
subjective
that.
autoethnography, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and then you're an artist basically. If you're trying to publish a work like that, you're a real interpretivist, really do subjectivist.
All right.
You have to be an artist. You have to be a Clifford Geertz. You have to be a Carl Weick. There are clever people that can pull it off. You and I are not those people. Very few people I know are those people. And Dick Boland is that person, right? That person comes once in a generation. So most of the if we have PhD students listening and they're like, I'm a cigarette smoking, cappuccino drinking, beret wearing interpretivist, uh, fine, you can call yourself that. You probably don't do a very good job writing. You're not going to convince anyone and you won't get published. The way you get published is to have constructs, concepts, operationalize those constructs, define them, operationalize them, show in your data where you get them.
Well, I think that's not even the point. Like, first of all, I agree. So, all right, we can strip that, right? The label. It reminded me, by the way, of a very nice editorial by Ron Weber when he was editor in chief. He wrote an editorial, I think it was called Moving Beyond Outdated Labels or something. And he
Hmm.
has this powerful quote like, I don't want to be labeled this and I don't want to be labeled that. We need to move beyond. What matters is what we do and how we do it. Whether you
Right.
call that this tradition or that tradition is irrelevant. And it is, I agree, right? So it doesn't matter what sort of nomenclature or what category you put yourself in. When you code, you need to code consistently.
All right. And then the second thing you brought up was reliability, and I frankly think that is the issue with LLMs. And this is the one that was brought up at AOM that Kale brought up. He's like, do we have iterator reliability? Uh, and then we had Vern Glazer, Natalia Lavina, that guy, what was his name?
Anton Gollwitzer.
Yeah. Wait, say that slowly.
Anton is his first name. Gollwitzer
Anton
is his second name. I think
Goldwitzer? Yeah.
Gollwitzer. I think he's
Yeah.
Austrian. Sounds
Yeah. So
Austrian.
he was pushing for reliability. Kale was pushing for, but here's the deal. I think that's a fun place that you have to be like, okay, I need to show reliability of my operationalization. I need to show that when I code something, so how can you do that? Well, you can do inter-rater reliability of humans and LLMs. You could maybe grab two LLMs. You could use ChatGPT and Gemini. There are all sorts of ways of establishing You can do it
You
manually
you are
and
talking about demonstrating reliability, showing it,
yeah,
using some
yeah,
techniques like I'm not even talking about that. I said you need to be when you code, you need to code reliably
yeah.
consistently, meaning that if I say this and this and this statement talks about values, then the
Hmm.
next time I can't just say it's something else, right? So
Yeah,
I need to
yeah,
be this. And then forthcoming from that, I need to demonstrate that I've done that, to readers or reviews, etc. But I think the more fundamental problem in when people code is to actually be consistent and reliable in what
yeah.
you're
Oh,
doing.
yeah, of
And I
course.
think it's just like, look, simple thing is like, here's all my coding. Check for consistency. Have I been consistent in my labeling of my open codes? When I
Yeah,
said here, this is anger and this one is frustration. Is it really two different things? Am I being consistent? Because
yeah,
humans are not consistent. Like in
yeah.
general, if I code tomorrow, I'll be slightly different. So I think that's the first issue: whether and how I later demonstrate that in a paper, and whether or not we need something like intercoder reliability, where two people recode everything and we count the number of codes in where they
Or
differ,
two LLMs do, or a person does with one
whatever,
LLM.
right? But in the first
Yeah,
instance, I like it as a quality assurance, like check for myself while I'm doing it. It's like, hi, I've coded these five. and now use that to see whether the next 10, which I coded 3 weeks later after my second set of interviews, have I been consistent? Because frankly, probably not, because my thinking has evolved. I may have already have a lens or an idea, you know?
And when I code early quote like early interviews, and then I get into the 30th interview or something, my codes are much different. I have to go back
Da,
and recode
exactly,
them.
right?
Yeah.
So it'll be really
I do
helpful
that
for
with
that.
grading too. I think I'm very hard when I grade student assignments. I'm really strict for the first few. And then I start seeing all these crappy assignments. And by like my 30th student, I'm just being a really easy grader. And then you got to kind of go back to those first few students and be like, all right, let me readjust how strict I was when I'm doing my grading. But all right, so you brought up a cool distinction. You brought up a distinction about being reliable and demonstrating reliability. And what I think's cool about, I guess, being a researcher, is that the reviewers require that you demonstrate things. And sometimes in your effort to demonstrate those things, you have to go back and make sure you're being those things, right?
Yeah.
So it's like we know in the review process we're going to have to demonstrate reliability. So let's, in order to demonstrate it, let's,
So
subject ourselves to it.
let's take this, and we can take plenty of examples. But I think one place where it actually would help a traditional qualitative researcher is just like with rigor, consistency. Like all of this is kind of rigor. It can help me be more rigorous. So that's, I think, one of the nice roles that it can do. Now, the second one, you brought this up a little
Well,
bit.
third one, we have two so far. The first is fuzzy front end ideation. I can put different
Yeah, that to me is the second.
structures of
Yeah,
sense making. Yeah.
yeah, or different perspectives. Like
Yeah.
sort of like what's going on in my data. When we look at this and we're like, hey, this is a story about X. Well, maybe, you know,
Yeah.
maybe it's something else that we're not seeing because whatever, we're not seeing it. Maybe it can help us this, right? So maybe it can help us with this. So this could be the front end of the coding, like you suggest. To me, it could also be, in a classical process, we do, let's say 30 interviews, we open code all of them, and out comes this model about everything. There's culture in there, there's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
leadership, there's
Yeah.
projects, there's people, task technology, everything is in there. And then like, okay, which of this becomes my story? Which of them is the interesting bit? And it's a
Yeah.
bit like I sometimes feel lost. It's like you can have different theoretical perspectives you throw at it. Is this a story about resources? Is this a story about objects? Is this a story about leadership? And then, you try to work out what an interesting story is that you could build later your paper around. And, like we come in with our views, and I think it might be helpful in just giving us completely different views from which to look at the data. I haven't actually done that, not even in playing around with this, but I do think it's sort of like bringing in new perspectives on the data. Why wouldn't you use it? Just again, as a check or as a means for you to just get your own ideation going.
So there was a session at AOM. Aaron Lindbergh and some other people were running it. It was around physical digital.
Yeah, I
That's
wasn't
coming
there.
up
I
here.
know, like I had a conflict
Yeah.
because I wanted to go there because that's a topic of mine.
Yeah. So and yeah, it's like your firmware paper, right?
Yeah, well,
That's one
that's
that
one of
they
these. Yeah, I have a whole
that's
bunch
one
of
they
those.
referred to. They had a lot of the folks from Norway, right? They're doing some of this stuff, and Eric Montero was there, and Eric Montero is more of a old school kind of interpretivist thinker, and very cool, great work. He and Aaron spoke, and I don't know if Aaron said it or I said it, but we both agreed that this group needs a dependent variable. Everyone's just talking about how it's all physical and it's all digital and physical and digital go together and it's like, all right, there's only so many papers that can talk about physical and digital going together. We have to come up with why it matters.
Yeah, to do
So,
what?
yeah, to what? So Aaron and I said this is a field that needs a dependent variable. And Eric was like, what the we don't need a dependent variable, what kind of, and then we had to like, Aaron and I had to kind of back up a little and say no, we don't mean like a specific variable that, but we need some sort of outcome that we're interested in and can give us a true north. I think that's actually, and it's not physical digital. I think it's really qualitative research in general. People like to focus on the process because that's what you see when you see qualitative data. You see all these processes. But what might be really interesting with an LLM is to think in terms of that dependent variable. It's
Ah,
like, all right, let's say I want to see, I'm doing something on AI governance and I interviewed a bunch of people around AI governance. I'd be like, okay, what are they doing to build trust? What are some of the tactics these folks say to build trust? Boom. What are some of the things people are talking about with compliance? When are they compliant? When are they not compliant? Right. So I could give outcome variables and I could ask the data set, and this would help me with my ideation. Right. And I think that's the thing qualitative researchers could really play with, at least in the very early stages of their coding or their sense making, would be play with different dependent variables that you
I
might be
like that.
interested in
I like that very
using.
much because you're absolutely right. And I sit on the same side of the fence with you. Like I'm trying to push everyone, myself as well, right, to not just think of the process, but think of it as the process as part of an IPO, right? Like a trigger, a process, and an outcome, right?
Yeah.
Because then the difficult thing, like the process is difficult, sure, right? But that's sort of what we lead towards naturally. Determining the trigger, the input, like what starts the process, is sometimes difficult. But what does the process explain? What's the
Yeah.
outcome, right? It's really difficult sometimes, and it could help if you think about an LLM going through your data that you feed it and something. Like, what here is changing because of whatever is going on, right? So maybe, I don't know, confusion from low to high, or this turning into something else, or whatever else happens. So I can see how it could help in figuring out this outcome box, what you call a dependent variable. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very nice idea. I
Now,
like
I
it.
will tell you that the pitfall here, and this is why qualitative researchers don't do it. And I've actually done this. I did it with my dissertation, and I remember the first paper. If you go back to I think it's like my 2012 paper in institutional logics and stuff. We had a kind of causal relationship in the early versions of that paper. We were saying, look, these are the outcomes that these different things lead to. And the review team just killed it. They said, no, you have whatever, 60 interviews or 80 interviews, however interviews we did. You don't know everything. You didn't do like a statistical test. You can't make these causal arguments from qualitative. And I would disagree. I think if you have an outcome variable, you have some data, and you're constructing a proposition on the back end, sure, you compare it to the literature, you look at and you're proposing
You can
this.
propose a causal linkage.
Yes, but then
Yeah.
the reviewers will kill you for it, or at least in my experience, they sit there and say, "But you can't say that because you don't have evidence enough to say this."
Well,
And I'm
this
like, I
could
don't
also be an
have
artifact of
evidence.
the time, Nick, right? This was like late, early decade of the 2000s. I'd
Yeah.
say you probably can say that now and it would get away with it.
Well, I don't know. I think it still gets killed. I have papers right now where, see, I think that reviewers want to see evidence for every assertion you make. And I frankly think you can make good assertions without any evidence whatsoever. If I
Yeah,
had
duh.
just a conceptual paper
Yeah.
with no data, I can make assertions. And if it's good and clever and supported by logic, then they'll let me publish that paper. But the moment I use data and I make assertions, I now need to show some sort of irrefutable evidence. So that's what drives me nuts. I think we should allow people to kind of stretch a little on the back end of their paper and propose some things from there, and maybe have some out that other people can test.
I think a useful exercise is for people to actually start writing theory only papers where you're
Yeah.
just left with no other choice. You're making usually causal, certainly explanatory propositions without data. And that
Hmm.
just doing that alone will force you to write in a particular way, be assertive to the point that at least, a panel of 4 or 5 people accept it. Anyway, so that's I think is very tough learning. And then that can help with your empirical papers, your qualitative papers, where you can then make some of these assertions. For example, I like in the back end of inductive qualitative theory generating work in the discussion, I have some very speculative parts. For
Hmm.
example,
Yeah, I love that.
speculating about generalizing to other contexts. Now,
Yeah.
I can't generalize. I know that but I can speculate how you might be able to generalize. Why not?
Yeah. Of
Right? So
course, why not?
I
Yeah.
can speculate and have some propositions about how, I don't know, a different industry, a different product, a different set of this or that might change whatever my logic was that I just proposed based on the cases that I've studied. Right? So and I like doing that. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
Hey, let's talk about two other aspects here of qualitative research with LLMs. Because frankly, when I did this, and I, as I said, interacted with LLMs about this, we first came up with a general process, right? So sort of like, all
Hmm.
right, research design, data collection, data analysis, and writing, like 4 stages, right? So we talked a little bit about research design, designing interviews. We talked about analysis and coding. I haven't talked much about data collection. We'll talk about that later. But interpretation and reporting. Now, see. here's the scenario. Like you're writing a paper and in every section of your findings, etc., you're looking for the most powerful quotes, right? And the
Yeah.
snippets of
You're looking
evidence,
for the stories a
and you're
lot of
looking for
times,
the
right?
stories and doing all of that. Hello. I mean, isn't that an obvious task to automate away? Hi, here's what I'm saying. Go find the best quote.
Yeah.
Is there an issue with
Well,
that I'm not seeing?
well, yeah, I think so. First off, all right, there are a whole bunch of different ways of doing qualitative work, and what you're doing is basically, and this is like the Goya approach, where it's like I make an assertion, I have a encapsulated bit of evidence for that assertion. All right, that's a little different than, say, for example, what so Aaron Lindbergh and I last year published with James Howison and Kale published a paper where we looked at uh, open source software, and we looked at how they did a pull request and then how they resolved the pull request over the course of this. We were looking at not atomistic, here's an idea, give me a quote. We were looking at entire trajectories of pull requests and
Yeah,
looking
that's
at the
different. Yeah, okay.
process and what happened. So it's like we needed the story from the beginning to the end. So we looked at, like, hundreds of these stories, and then we pulled a few into the paper as illustrative of the point we were trying to make about modulation. There's this modulation process that happens. Uh, so what we constructed was a modulate. I don't know how on earth, even if I threw all that data into an LLM and I told them I want a modulation process, give me
Yeah.
some pull. Like, I don't know how we could have used an LLM for that. So I think that idea, if you're looking for extended stories,
Yeah, okay. For vignettes, if you want,
maybe there's
or
some.
episodes, yeah.
Yeah. Now, if there's something I'm doing that is like, okay, I have all this open source data and I want to look at more atomistic interactions. Whenever someone, say, uses informality, does someone else come back with, positive or negative things, right? So if I'm trying to do things that can be encapsulated, smaller and atomistic and defined, then I think we can use LLMs for that. So I think depending on what you're doing,
Yeah, I see that.
I don't
So I
know.
have a bit more traditional stance then, right? Like
Uh,
but in my world, what I described, I think it's just wouldn't it be a very helpful, obvious thing to do as a critical reviewer, just to double check that my claims are evocative and expressive of whatever the assertion is I wanted to make, whether
mm,
there's consistency between my findings and my model, all these little checks that we later hope the reviewers see or not see. Like I can use it as a protection tool, can I not? Like, why wouldn't I do that in every paper before I submit it? Throw
right.
it in, saying, check for these things, check for the consistency of my coding, take my data structure, run it against my findings, run against my model, check the claims to the code. Like, where have I gone astray? And when I mean go astray, I really mean especially consistency and internal coherence in my writing and in my argumentation and
Yeah.
this fit
So,
between the
yeah.
method, data, findings, and theory. All right, that's difficult, and as an editor, this is where the papers fall apart. This internal consistency is usually the
Yeah.
problem. They're saying they want to chart this, the method doesn't fit, that the data says something else, and the findings about something else completely.
Yeah.
Right. So the
Yeah.
issue is always internal consistency, internal
Yeah.
validity, if you want to call it that, and it can check for that. And
Well, it's
why wouldn't I use that check as an affordance to help me?
construct validity and internal validity, right?
Yeah,
Those are the
these
two things
things.
you. And yeah, I think for if you're doing Goya, if you're doing in qualitative meta-analysis, Reagan has this approach that they have that's a bit more. I don't know. You might call it closer to the positivistic side of these things, but it's like I have a construct, I operationalize I'm relating the construct. I think then it becomes easier. It can still be useful in more narrative flow type, like we use this metaphor of modulation from audio synthesis. Uh, I don't know. I have to think about that. How would it take like broad metaphors show, that starts getting way on the human
Yeah.
construction side. The reason we got published is we as humans made a construction, and that construction illustrates something that we think is meaningful. Uh, the closer you get to the human construction side, just like writing an essay, the less useful I think the LLM is going to be. The more you get on the other side, which is atomistic encapsulated constructs in their relationship, I think is the more useful an LLM will be. Would you buy that if there's this like continuum of
Well, it brings me to a topic that I wanted to bring up in general, because if you were a fundamentalist, a fundamentalist qualitative research, very steeped in the where is this coming from as a counter movement to the traditional scientific method and blah 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 blah. Right. So when we talked about how do we teach it, and I say I start with
Hmm.
Jane Goodall, and you'd start with that dude that did the cultural ethnographies in India, or wherever it was. Right. What was the point of all of that? The point was the researcher as a subject interpretation, right? It's me. I'm living with the apes. I'm doing things that cannot be objectively, like from externally measured. That's the whole point of it. And from that vantage point, well, we shouldn't use any alarms or anything,
Yeah.
right? Because it
Yeah.
takes all of that away, right? So, if from that vantage point, because we are still constructing interpretations, I am still, it's me. I am offering interpretation. I hope my interpretation is a plausible and useful explanation for what's going on. Ideally, it has even, predictive ability, has causality in it, to at least to the point that it's good enough that someone goes and checks whether this is really going on, whatever, right? So this is usually the point, but it's still my interpretation of the situation. And of course, if I rely more and more on tools of automation, which is what it is and remains, then I'm taken away from that somehow. And of course,
Yeah.
depending on how much I use it and how much I rely on it and how much I use it to automate, like give it order and it does the things for me versus interact with this, I'm moving more and more away from the original reason why I start doing qualitative research in the first place.
All right. So this is what I think is interesting. We started, and I wanted to dismiss the whole positivist interpretivist thing. And then what we've done in this conversation is come around to if this essentially recreating interpretivism and positivism, because if you're on the kind of interpretist end of the continuum, which is that it's a human act, I'm sweeping in context, I'm constructing an understanding, that might be my unique understanding. LLMs get less useful. So on that continuum, on the other side, which is I can operationalize my constructs as variables. I can understand those variables, and I need to establish seeing them in a consistent way throughout, establishing reliability, construct validity, and then I want to relate them to each other, right? Internal validity. You start moving to the more positivistic end of the spectrum. And what we're basically saying is the more positivistic you are, the more you're likely to find LLMs useful.
I'd say so. And I think also I would go as far as like most of the work in IS, irrespective of what labels people put in their papers or think of themselves, that's most of the time that's what we're doing. We usually look for some level of generalizable or transferable insights that are not germane to the case or that are not
Yeah.
really subjective interpretation. Usually they don't matter to our field.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because we are not anthropologists. Like
Right.
my own
You're
unique
not Jane
individual
Goodall.
experience usually doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter. What we're interested in is how did this company deal with blockchain?
Yeah.
Right? That's not hardcore subjective interpretivism. This is not a solipsistic view of the world. And even if it did, it wouldn't matter, right? So most of the time we're not doing this and we're not attempting that. So
Yeah.
we're naturally leaning towards the other side. And I don't want to use the label again, but I do think that's normally what we're doing.
Yeah.
Some generalizable pattern, some
Yeah.
recognizable pattern, something that we can operationalize.
And my pushback to the calling myself an interpretivist in that is that, yes, of course it's interpretivist. I probably have more of an interpretivist vibe in my body than I do, for qualitative work. So I get it. And I construct creative explanations and it's contextually, right? So I buy all of that. I guess when I reject the interpretivist term, I'm basically saying, yeah, that's all good, except now you need constructs. You need relationships among those constructs. So even when you do that, when we did our modulation paper, there are elements of modulation that we showed in our data, and we had to show that we operate. So it's like we need to move once we make those statements, we need to bring back in some of that rigor and some of that linear thinking, or else you're not going to get published, I guess is my point. Right. So uh, how many commercials are enough for our podcast? Because I think you added commercials. Did you add
Where's this
commercials?
coming from? Like, Nick, you're taking us completely. Yeah. So there are commercials, and they're enough now to cover my costs, like
Well,
my
wait, you know how
costs.
much money we're making? How much money are we making on this
Well, we're
podcast?
just covering my costs. It's not enough to invite you for dinner yet.
Ah, so seriously, so you've been doing it now for like 3 months.
3 months, yeah. but we got
And it's
payout.
just,
Yeah.
and I know you've been paying out of pocket for this platform we use to put this out. So that's just covering your out of pocket costs. Not You're not
Well,
making a
we'll
profit
see.
yet.
It has a couple of months delay, so it's we'll see. It's not really worth it at the moment. No, good
All
for
right.
sure. Hey, can we get back on track?
No,
I
in
have
a
some more
couple of
points
months, we need to have the actual dollar amount, and then you have to tell me on the air what the
on the
dollar
air.
amount is,
Yeah,
and
fair
then we're going
enough.
to make the decision: do we continue with commercials, or do we cut the commercials and let people listen for free? And I'll send you a check every year to help cover your platform.
Yeah, nice.
Uh,
All right. Except for that little detour, can I bring up what I think are the two most worrisome pitfalls, right?
yes.
In LLM for qual research. So the first one is the peril of automation. So I think, and this is a classic, right? It's not germane to this context, but I think it's really worrisome. Now, if you go ahead and take your data and throw it into an LM and saying like, do this, do the coding, do this or whatever, have it do certain things that otherwise you would be doing. I think that's incredibly dangerous. First of all, you have a hallucination reliability problem. Second, you have that what we call the C level, the C journal level quality problem, like it gets you to a certain level, etc. And the third one, is the craft based argument. You need to do that yourself, not only to learn, but you need to code your interviews, not because you need the codes that come out of it, because that forces you to engage with the data,
Yeah.
right? So
Who
if
are you?
you
This isn't about writing a paper. This is about
researching,
contributing to knowledge, and
yeah.
you are a knowledge
First, in the
contributor and
first
expert.
instance, learning something about the case that you're studying in. So I think automation, as per usual, is a troublesome, worrisome pitfall because it's so easy to do. It's just one prompt and it generates your data structures for you, right? So it's dangerous in that because it's so easy. It's a similar
All right,
situation
those
that
are
when
record.
smart PLS came up. Sorry, just this one argument. When smart PLS came up and you replaced Stata and Mathematica and Lizrel even to some point, and then it led for a couple of years. It led to the situation that we had a lot of structural equation modeling people that literally had no idea what they were doing, and they're throwing things into these things, and they're trying to publish research models that statistically or theoretically made no sense whatsoever. And they didn't, they're just like, here's a bunch of asterisks, that's got to be true. And I see the same danger here, right? It's really a trap if you automate it. So if you use this, you have to use it is in this collaborative, interactive dialogue, very critical view as to something that helps you in your thinking and not as an automation tool. That's a really big danger, I think. Would you agree?
I think it's beautiful. So you hit two incredibly important ideas. The first is what you're calling the C-level research. I'm not sure people appreciate that enough, and that's the issue with if LLMs write for you, and if they do, and you depend on them too much. Our job is to generate knowledge, to come up with novelty, whether it's incremental or whether it's bigger than incremental. It's supposed to do something new, rigorous, and cool. That's essentially what we do. We're supposed to be doing. The more you lean on these LLMs, because they're kind of the lowest common denominator of your data set, of society's, right, the language of everything. It's the most probabilistic. By their very nature, they're giving you the most probable answer. When you give the most probable answer, it's the most obvious answer. It's the least interesting answer. The more you lean on LLMs, the more likely you are to do C-level work.
Yeah, I agree.
B journal, C journal. This is not A-level journal work, right? So that's number one. The more you lean on them, the less interesting and super high quality you're going to generate. That's huge. That's a very big idea right there. But then to that, you added, I think, even more of a big idea. And this is the virtuous reviewer or the virtuous scholar, craftsman idea.
Why
If
is it
we're
like?
researchers, if you wake up in the morning and you look yourself in the mirror and you say, I am a researcher, I am a scholar, my job is to know something and hopefully add to what we know. But at a minimum, I should know what we know because I am a scholar in this domain. And if I don't know what we know, how can I look myself in the mirror in the morning? And the
Yeah,
more I depend on tools as a substitute for my knowledge, not as a complement of my knowledge, the more I am a fraud. And I think people, for the most part, don't want to be frauds. If they don't stop and think about looking themselves in the mirror, they might go ahead because we're in this tremendous pressure to publish and we knock out papers and they want to knock out papers and they're busy and all this. So, but I think if you remind people, which you just did, that don't be a fraud. Don't be, you're a scholar, you're a researcher. You have to wake up in the morning and look yourself in the mirror and say, who am I? And you have to at least say, I'm striving to know something and move knowledge forward. And if you're not striving to know something and move knowledge forward, then you're a fraud, you're a charlatan, you're a poser, and you should have you
And
should do
the
something to
analogy
build
that I
some
want to
self-respect.
use is when you listen to someone talking about qualitative research in a presentation, or even more important, in a job talk.
Hmm.
You go, someone presents a paper and it's qualitative, and you ask the person one question about the case, and it immediately shows whether they know the case, whether
Hmm.
they've been there, whether they talk to people, they've been inside the building. You know, what I always say, like, go inside the building, go inside, like, what does it smell there? What does it look like? You know, what are the people doing? So, and that shows. And to me, if you, you know, I know this is a very traditional view, but how the hell are you going to study something that you've never seen or never been, never done? You know,
Yeah.
and I think it shows. And I like asking, not I like asking the question, but I love when I hear someone talk where it's very clear that they know the case and they can
They
tell
know their
you little
stuff.
stories and they have anecdotes. And this one time that they talk to blah, you know, these things show. They don't show in the paper, but they goddamn they show in a job interview. You know
Mhm.
this situation when you ask one question about the method or the data, and the person says something like, "Oh, my colleague did that."
Yeah, that's off. Well, all right. So job talks, that should never happen. When you do a job talk, you have to know
It
everything.
must be
But
about your work.
for 20 years now, I've been watching job talks, and I have to say, the place where people shine and the place where people get killed is not in the present. Yes, if they do a bad presentation, they don't get the offer. That's a done deal. But let's say you did a good presentation, and the place where you go to shine and the place where you get torpedoed is in the Q&A. As a
Oh
matter of
yeah.
fact, I don't know, I remember Aaron Schechter when he was interviewing at Georgia. I hope he doesn't mind me telling the story, but Dale Goodhue, and Dale. By the way, you mentioned PLS. Dale Goodhue wrote some stuff in MIS Quarterly
In the
about a
90s.
decade ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, about a decade ago on PLS to show that a lot of the inferences we're drawing from PLS are wrong,
Yeah, yeah, I
right?
remember that with yeah, I remember that.
He has two papers. I think MISQ, both of them, maybe one's in ISR,
Either ours,
but
one of them, where they showed through simulation that Monte Carlo simulations that,
yeah,
they have some serious inference problems. Yeah,
yeah, it's basically that it increases the beta on
exactly. And
your
that's what
model.
it did, at least back then.
So so it's basically making it easier to find significant findings. So that was huge. Well, anyway, Dale was the man, right? He was our analysis, statistical inference guy in the department. So Aaron was done with his presentation, or at some point in the presentation, and then Dale asks him a question. And I forget what the question was, but I just remember the dynamic that happened. And Aaron's like, you're right. I'm glad you asked that. Then he goes over to the whiteboard, whips out a marker, and starts writing mathematical notation
Oh,
on the
that's
whiteboard.
that's a power move, man.
It's
That's so
like,
cool.
boom, drop the
Yes.
mic. It's like, not only do I know what I presented, I know the proofs and the underlying formalities of what and I can
Well,
actually
that's
address.
Aaron for you. I mean, like he did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you
So
know.
it's like when you have mastery of a topic, it shows in the Q&A. Sure, your presentation, a trained monkey with enough reps can do a good presentation. Uh, but when the Q&A, when
Except
someone
of
asks
course when
you
they have shitty slides with like inconsistent bullet points and
with
stuff.
all their bullet points and then long sentences after each bullet point. Uh, but the Q&A is when is this a master of their topic or is this not a master of their topic? And I think you're never going to be a master of your topic if you're using LLM, if you're leaning too heavily on LLMs to do your work for you, right?
But I'll tell you this, like I will now, I guess I'll see more as a quality assurance, a checker, whatever I want to call that. But as a dialogue partner, I will use it. And I
Yeah, I
think
will
it
too.
makes sense to not forego these advantages that I do obviously see. I will be very cautious in relying on it too much. And I'll be honest, because I'm too worried about the quickness, the shortcuttiness of it all. It's so goddamn easy to fall into the automation trap. I'm really worried
Yeah.
about this. Also, because I think if you do this too much, then you're automating yourself away.
Yeah.
Not you and me, but the next, like if you're doing something that a tool can do.
Mastery. At the end, we have to be masters and we can't. But I have to say, I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it in the front end. I'm going to play. And I think the key is the one bit of advice I would give is to just document.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I wanted to bring that up as well.
Yeah, whatever it is you do, just make sure you don't do it without documenting it and saying which version, did I use ChatGPT? Did I use Gemini? Did I use ChatGPT 4? Did I use ChatGPT 5? What were the prompts that I used?
Yes,
Just every time you do it, just throw a freaking Word document where you're just capturing the prompts
yeah,
or whatever.
yes,
Just make sure that everything you did you can at least go back to and show the order of doing it, the prompts you use, the
yes.
version, because at this point who knows, right?
We don't know yet. The guidelines are still emerging, and I want to stress that point that you're making because I think you mentioned it to me earlier, and I think you're absolutely right. Document everything. Like for now, I think the rule would be make a copy of your complete prompting, right?
Yeah.
In like we don't know
And
yet how
output.
to
Actually,
yeah,
not
and
it can't be a
output.
Word document. Make a
Yeah.
folder and yeah.
Absolutely. Like save everything. And I think we'll go as far as saying like we need to have, I don't know whether it be the full prompting and some sort of open science server, certainly an extract of that. We probably also want to see the data, to be honest. I can see that in an age of LLM augmented qualitative research, we will have steeper requirements for data reporting, just like we've seen that in the quantitative tradition. I don't see a good argument why not, to be honest. So I'd say like, well, prepare your data for some sort of public checking, document the freaking hell out of everything. I'm not saying you need to show that necessarily, but you want to do that in case you need to report it. Because I think we might actually end up going this way that during the review process, maybe not in published paper, at some stage you may have to show that prompt and the interaction, the intermediate outcomes, and all these sorts of things. So I totally agree with you. Like if you do this, make sure you document properly and comprehensively for now until we figure out what exactly we want to see and what proof is enough or whatever, right? I think that's
I
very good
guarantee
advice.
there are papers in the works that are going to give us guidance, but until those are out, just document everything. All right, my brother. Well, this was fun. It was
This
good
was
to see
fun.
you. I guess we're back in our season now, and we're going to have interviews
And
with
we have a
people.
couple of guests line up. I'm looking forward to that. Different kind of
Yeah.
people, not the usual suspects. So yeah, we'll talk again in 2 weeks, I guess, already in Notre Dame.
You're going to be here, my brother. You're visiting me.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
All
All
right.
right. I'll look forward to it. Nick, good seeing you.
All right. Later.